The views and opinions expressed on Where Did the Road Go belong to the person speaking them. They do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of other people on the show or the show as a whole. This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by the following amazing individuals: Greg Ross, Billuminati, Allison Cook, Yvonne Williams, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, and Michael Frisky. Thank you all for helping to make this show possible. And if you'd like to help out, become a patron at wheredidtheroadgo.com. It's only $3 a month for lots of extra content.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I have Mike Fiorito. Did I say it right?
That's close enough.
All right.
That's good. That's perfect.
And Joshua Crotchin. No, that's not it.
That's not perfect nor right.
Cutchin, that's what it is.
See, here, Mike, on Where Did the Road Go, we just live with Seriah's mispronunciations and just keep rolling.
Right. Words are hard sometimes. You just got to accept it.
Words.
So, Mike, you have written this great book called UFO Symphonic, which I finished reading last night.
Excellent.
And it's a very interesting book. I don't think I've read a book that covers this type of stuff the way you've covered it.
Well, give me a sense of what you mean by that, because I was kind of aiming for that, but at the same time, the way stuff comes into my brain, usually it goes and takes a left turn, it becomes upside down, and comes out different. So I'd be curious just to know what you mean by that, and I'll kind of respond to that.
Well, you have like a synthesis of both your own personal accounts, stories from other people. They're both paranormal and music related, but also some of them aren't necessarily paranormal. Some of them are just synchronistic or show how music creates connections between people or the power of sound.
Mm-hmm.
And this was sort of, I had sent you this after the last time we had talked. I did what was it, Strange Realities conference. This is what I did, is paranormal and sound, but nowhere near the level you've taken it to here.
Well, that's a great insight, and I like that you saw it that way. So if to respond to it, one thing is I wanted to make one of the themes of the book is polyphonic. And I kind of, at the beginning, I quote Wayburn talking about polyphonic music, meaning many voices.
Mm-hmm.
When I talk about Palestrina, there's a section, and I talk about the Beatles using harmonies in a sense, it's certainly in a polyphonic sense. And so I did want this book to be a kind of braid of inputs, and you'll notice that not every story is the same.
Yeah. Yeah, none of them are really the same.
Right, and it was a goal, actually, and it was the question that I asked people was, can you tell me a story that is inexplicable that relates to music? I didn't want to be heavy-handed. I didn't want to take their hand and say, tell me a UFO story.
Right.
I wanted them to kind of come to me now because of the community that we're in, and I'm in different communities like Josh. So I'm in the music community. I do a lot of music journalism, so I know a lot of musicians and a lot of bluegrass musicians because I've written a lot about bluegrass. And then in the UFO community, so I got kind of, and also I should say the psychedelic community. So I'm also there is a Venn diagram where these all meet.
Right.
And I got a kind of hybrid responses, which I was delighted to receive, so that the book didn't have, okay, here's the story, guy sees a UFO, there's music, next story, there's illuminated light, an orb, it's a UFO, now there's music. The stories that I heard were very disparate. And so great, I'm really glad that you responded to that in that way. And I also wanted it to be, I want it to be very narrative. So I wanted them to be stories.
Yeah.
And not anecdotal, not just like, some guy from Led Zeppelin saw a UFO or
Right.
this famous, right? This celebrity. The celebrity of the person wasn't a factor. I didn't care. And there were people of, like, say, a bigger names. I just didn't want to go after that.
Right.
The story was important to me. And I felt it was my responsibility to have my stories in there and to have my voice in there. It's my book. I can't have other people's inputs compose my book. I felt it was my responsibility to have this narrative that is an arc of narrative that takes you from beginning to end and has other people's stories inserted.
Yeah. And it flows very well.
That's great to hear.
Well, and I think part of the reason that it works so well, Mike, is that this is all about the human element, which, gets so often lost in the shuffle. I mean, I know it's almost kind of trendy to sort of be like, oh no, it's about the human element, it's about people. But I rarely see the follow through as thoughtful as in this book, and I think that's something to be commended all on its own too.
Agreed.
Well, thank you. I mean, at the end of the day, I really wanted it to be a humanities book, and my hope and goal is, and I've kind of felt this way even with For All We Know, is I'm trying to bring other people into the conversation, so people that may never touch a UFO book and
Right.
just sort of say, I don't read that. That's just say, well, why don't you read the book? Just go ahead and give it a shot, and to make the emphasis on the stories and on the exploration. One thing I should also say is, especially the UFO Symphonic, my preconception going in, it changed. As I began to speak to people, the scope of the book got larger, and it morphed. And frankly, I was in a process of, gnosis as I wrote the book. I was discovering it as I'm going through it.
I mean, for me too, obviously music is a huge part of my life as well as this stuff. And I don't know if I'd be doing this show if it wasn't for music, because I was doing a music show and I wasn't thinking of this as a podcast. I was thinking of it as a radio show. So because I had the music show, I said, hey, do you mind if I do a talk show also? And they were like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And so that's where the Road Go came from. But I'd never thought, I should do a podcast and then also air it on the radio. I just thought, I should do a radio show. And then I'm like, well, now I also want to put it out as a podcast, not thinking too much about it, not realizing that podcasts were basically on the verge of exploding at that point.
Right. And we're all all of us here are tied together by music.
Yeah. Different
Interestingly
music.
enough. Yeah.
And I think that's an important thread that gets picked up here, because it's something that gets taken for granted in a lot of these spaces, is the association or the correlation or the tendency, rather, I guess is a better way to put it, of artists in general, but I would argue musicians specifically, and having connections to this other space, which I think is probably the most neutral way to put it. And for people needing context, you can look back to the old fairy legends of them abducting a piper or a fiddler for a fairy party or something along those lines. But I've been wondering this myself, Mike, and I would like to get your sense of it. Arts and the paranormal are connected. Those personalities seem to connect. Do you think that musicians are disproportionately represented in that cohort, even amongst artists? Like it's not just visual artists and authors and such, but it's actually musicians enjoy some sort of special frequency in this population.
That's a great question, and I would have to say I'm not really sure. I think that people who are artists, when I presented this book, I did a live book reading, and someone asked me, well, why didn't you include other art forms in this book? And I said, well, because I didn't want it to be a 1,000-page book. I had to circumscribe the scope. And also I wanted it to be really focusing on the music, because that's my deep area of interest. That's something I'm super passionate about. I have knowledge to write about. It's really hard for me to say that, Josh. I think that
I don't know that I necessarily think that either. So I was just wondering if you had a different sense.
Yeah, I would say, just from say what I know about musicians, and I know other types of artists as well. I have friends that work in other mediums. But it fascinates me how, say, for example, I've been listening to YouTubes of interviews of John Anderson from Yes, and the way he would conceive of, who, by the way, was very much interested in fairy lore. His mother was Irish. His father was Scottish. He grew up on a farm. He was very much interested in mysticism, the paranormal. And music just came to him. He would conceive of melodies, and he couldn't write music and he couldn't read music. He still can't. He's 80-ish years old. But then he got this group of amazing musicians. I'll just take a set: Steve Howe, Bill Brutford, and Chris Squire, Rick Wakeman, who he, like a puppeteer, could kind of say, he would come up with a melody and say, okay, key change. And then he would sing the key change. He uses a pitch tuner to sometimes help him with the notes. But this is all of his orchestration in his mind, and it comes from where?
Yeah.
It's just Peter Rowan, who I wrote about in the book. He's famous, bluegrass, one of the really pillars of bluegrass, and he gets music from dreams. A Dakini came to him in a dream and he sung this song to him that he woke up and he had to get up and write it down. So I think musicians are speaking to, their ears are open to voices that are speaking to them, and those voices are the others. They're the others there, and you'll notice in the book, for me, the others, because I'm not so definitive in what I make. I don't make final claims in the book. I kind of think, we've talked about this before, Josh. Are the others us? Is it deep within our psyche, within our being? Is there connects us to the ocean of other beings of which we are all one? I'm not sure about that. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, I think you're right. I think anybody who's in any sort of creative space knows that I could come up with a composition for you in the next 10 minutes if I needed to. It doesn't mean it's going to be good. And the stuff that's really sticky and the stuff that is good. This is something that Eric Wargo talks about in his newest book, From Nowhere. It does come from nowhere. It just pops into your head fully formed. And it's such a weird thing to experience. Very similar to, waking up from a dream and scribbling down your idea. I think that there is some sort of space or place that gets tapped into, and maybe it's this imaginal neural network. I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, it's interesting to me that there's so much talk in this particular space, this paranormal space, about these sort of things, like the role of arts in this right now. As I just mentioned, Eric Wargo's newest book. I've got Fourth Wall Phantoms coming out soon. You've got this coming out soon. I know that there are a couple other projects that are happening right now, and it's just I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's a sea change. I don't know if it's a variation on Charles Fort's steam engine time, where we all just have collectively decided independently to do this, which is kind of paranormal in its own right. Or if it's a reaction to troubled times, which we're certainly in, or what. But I think that there's something significant to that too. So I think the timing of this book could not be better.
Well, thank you.
And both Ritzman and Vaney on Paratopia would often note that so many people who were experiencers were also artists of some sort. That was one of the things Jeff would look for. He'd be talking to someone and be like, by the way, are you an artist? And then invariably it would be like, well, sort of, yeah.
Yeah, I do think that it's funny, I as I was writing the book, Mescalito Riding His White Horse, and I had met Peter Rowan. I was going to do a short article, and Peter's had, at that point, he'd had a 60-year career, and as I didn't know all of his albums, and as I was listening to his albums, some I hadn't heard. And as I was speaking to him, and Peter is a magical person. He's a poet. He's a great raconteur. He's got a great sense of humor. And we weren't even talking about bluegrass. We were talking about spirituality. And he's also a Buddhist. And we were just having these prophetic, interesting, metaphysical conversations. And I said, Peter, I'm having dreams about you. And I said, no, not those kind of dreams. I'm having dreams about you. And I'm having images and visions and things come to my mind. And I think I have a bigger project here. And he was interested. But we were corresponding, we were speaking. And I said, let me send you this book, The Flip. So I sent him The Flip, Jeffrey Kripal.
Yeah.
He starts reading the book, and then he writes to me, sends me a text. He says, who's this book written for? And I scratched my head and I said, oh, of course it's not written for you because you're already there. You're already flipped. You're already, you're already inside this thing. You talk to spirits. You're inspired by, you get songs delivered to you from outer space. The book isn't written for you, Pete. It's written for academics and for people who, fight this notion of that impossible things don't happen. I mean, you guys, obviously, we all know about this stuff, but Pete really wasn't up to speed on that subject matter.
Right.
But it really struck me that, yeah. So to your question, Josh, I think our artists in general are their ears and their eyes and their minds they're looking for triggers. They're sensitive to those things.
Yeah, it might be as quote unquote simple as that old right brain, left brain chestnut, which, neuroscientific validity aside, I think is still a really powerful way to look at the way that certain personalities are wired.
Yeah. And I do think that there's a certain, awakening to that. So some people are some people are born with it, and sometimes you have to cultivate it. So, for me, I know I was born in that. I was born with that. I was born creating, and I was born writing, but I also had to cultivate it. And I had to, it's like a dream, catcher. I had to establish ways to get my writing done, to get it out, to get it done, to build practices. And there's this, when I'm in a state of writing a book, I'm in this kind of listening state, and I'm like looking around. You can't see me. I'm looking around right now, and my ears are looking and listening. And when I have dreams, I write them down. I email myself ideas, and I leave Post-it notes. My wife is like, who are you talking to? What is going on here?
I email myself ideas too, because it's like, who needs these fancy note-taking apps? Just email myself.
Exactly.
Like a madman, yeah.
I mean, I get more emails from myself than anyone else.
100%. 100%. I'm glad it's not just me. That makes me feel a lot better.
Right. It's a sign that you're possessed, and you're in that. Because it is a possession. It is a state of being, and when you're receptive, and it's kind of wonderful. And we were talking before about the whole book writing process, and when I get into that, I'm like transfixed.
Yeah.
And I'm in that state, and I'm like a sponge, and I'm exhilarated, and I feel like I'm really high from it. And then you go through the writing and the teasing out of the ideas, and it's this tapestry. For me, writing is a way of sewing together the bits and pieces of what's in my head swirling around, so it makes sense to me, and then I hope it makes sense to other people. But you go through all of that, and then you get the book out, and then you're depressed because it's like, this thing that's been inside of you has escaped, and this voice that you've been speaking to, these people, because there's not just one. It's like it's a tribe that you've been in concert with. So there is that feeling of there is a sadness when you get the book out, because you're sort of you do have to say goodbye to it. I mean, you could always look at it again, although I hardly ever want to, but
yeah,
you have to move on to something new.
Right. Well, let's talk about some of the things I've highlighted in your book here, because there's a bunch of stuff I found interesting. One thing here I didn't know. So first of all, one of the things you mentioned briefly is that you also deal a lot with psychedelic experiences in this book.
Yes.
And there's a quote here I picked out of the book that said, Harner wrote that when the Jivaro shamans consumed ayahuasca, they vomited a deep blue bubbly liquid, which they then spread on the ground. Like scryers, the shamans could see times and places in the puddled liquid, which they said was made of time, space, time, or mind. And I've never heard about that before.
Well, that's Terence McKenna. That's Terence McKenna, who I think that's from True Hallucinations. And I mean, first of all, that book, True Hallucinations, is, I mean, it could just as well be in the comedy section in any bookstore. But I mean, he's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant and adventurous. And yes, I found that interesting that they consumed this substance, they vomit it out, and then they spread it out on the rocks. And I think I made the comparison in the book that it reminds me of like a level 3 civilization, the Kardashev model, that you can manipulate space-time. That of course we're not even at a type 1 civilization where we're able to harness the power of the sun. In we can tap into it, but we're not running our civilization on the power of the sun. But civilizations that can tap into the center of galaxies, and the kinds of things that they can do from a high energy physics level. And I don't necessarily think that, I mean, that could also perhaps be done through magic. It's the scientist of the future, and I think John Keel said this, is a magician. It's not just a person in a lab with a microscope. It's someone who's combining, esoteric ideas and also using practical science, knowing its limits. But yeah, I found that fascinating. And there's something that gives me a chuckle about it too. But as I say in the book, there's nothing funny about this stuff when you're in it, when you're doing it. It's right, actually a thing of, it's a highest honor and complete respect. These plants are older than we are, wiser than we are, and oftentimes people that have these experiences, the plants are basically instructing them. They're advisors. Mm-hmm. And the plants are very much like the non-human intelligences that people encounter in paranormal experiences or UFO experiences. I found those commonalities very interesting.
There's another quote here that says, extraordinary things happen regularly in the villages of, Manianko. Manica?
Oh, that's the drummer that I was writing about. I think it's Miniaka, okay. And it's Diallo who wrote who wrote that. That's the writer. He co-wrote it. And so what I found interesting though, and I'm gonna take a look at the book, and I'm gonna quote from the book here because frankly I can't remember all of it. Fine. But I'll say it says that Diallo writes that strange lights appear around the village, which no one can explain. Points of light float in the air suddenly, becoming very strong, shining on people's bodies and going from tree to tree. Just as suddenly they disappear, then reappear, then disappear again. The entire village is surrounded by these mobile floating balls of light appearing unpredictably. All who have encountered them report that the lights have become increasingly bright and give off heat. And I'll continue if I may.
Yeah.
In Minyanka, spirits are also known as beings of the bush. According to the villagers, there was a time when there was no distinction between the humans and the beings of the bush, though they each kept their distance. They even spoke the same language. According to folklore, after a conflict between the humans and the beings of the bush, the creator decided to keep them separate. Since that time, when beings of the bush encounter human weakness, they tease and haunt that person. What does that sound like to you? That could be taken right out of a Whitley Strieber. I mean, Josh, that could be taken out of your writing.
I mean, yeah, it's once you get bitten by these things, you live with the teeth marks.
Right.
It gets its claws into you, and yeah, I mean, and again, that's just like and this is just my headspace lately. It's the same thing that could be said about ideas in general or inspiration in general. Like, you want to really like torture a creative person, like tell them that they can't commit their idea to paper or to a recording or something like that is a miserable experience, and having been there in the past.
Right. Right. And what I thought was really interesting with this story is the role of the musician that Diallo talks about. And he says that the musician is a healer, and the musician is brought in for a lot of different purposes. Healing is one of the purposes. The musician could be also brought in to create work songs. So let's say someone is working in the fields, and that kind of music would be different from healing music. That music would have to give rhythm to the motion. I don't know. I've never worked in the fields, but I'm working with a hoe, let's just say, when I'm plowing, I don't even know if I'm using the right terms, but I'm digging into the soil and I have this digging motion. And that music has to kind of mirror that and support it and facilitate it to make that person, I guess, more enthusiastic and get into that work. And I thought it was so interesting. I came across that book having read Mickey Hart's book on drumming. Have you guys read that book?
No.
Or you know of it?
No.
It was really interesting, I have to say. So Mickey Hart of the Dead, the Grateful Dead, and whatever someone's feelings might be about the Grateful Dead, they did bring world music. They brought musicians. They gave them a stage. A lot of people know world music and specific musicians because of the Grateful Dead, and they gave them a platform. And because they had such a following, that music really proliferated. So Mickey Hart wrote a book on drumming, and because he's Mickey Hart, okay, he's got money, right, and he's got access. So he hired researchers. He wrote it because it's written in a folksy style, which I really like. There's a real voice to it. But if he wanted to speak to Joseph Campbell, he called Joseph Campbell, and Joseph Campbell came. If he wanted to speak to a musicologist at Harvard, or go to a country and speak to a specific musician, he can make that happen.
Nice.
And so he wrote this wonderful book. It's a great book on it's the through line is drumming, but it's about music in general and the spirituality of music. And so I came across this Diallo in that book, and then I picked up the Diallo book. And that's another one of the problems of researching is you accumulate a vast library.
Yeah.
And but I just loved that. I loved that I looked across. It was important to look across cultures and I didn't want to draw it out to say, you see what Diallo says here? It's just like I said in this story on page whatever. I didn't want to make it so heavy-handed and obvious. But I'll read a section. Through dreams, Diallo says, the man learned how to treat illnesses. He was never trained. It was an unexplainable gift, maybe even supernatural. Diallo adds that since a child, music would come to him in dreams. He would awake from these dreams and quickly write them down. And that's the end of that story. But it was important for me to just make those parallels without shouting it out loud. And hopefully the reader would there would be either very consciously or some unconscious connecting, because as you said, Seriah, that these stories were different, but yet they cohered.
Yeah.
Yet it felt like there was a narrative.
And I mean, music, I think, definitely has healing properties. I mean, even on a small scale, if I'm feeling like depressed or something, I just need to listen to the right music. Sometimes it's hard to find the right music. I'll be like,
Right.
I don't know what it is. I'll be looking through my millions of albums going, what's the thing I need to listen to?
Right.
You know? And
anything. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say anything that can like measurably change your heart rate or blood pressure, like music can, is going to have other effects that we might not notice because they're too subtle or we don't have the tools to interrogate or whatever.
Well, I when I did the talk for Strange Realities, one of the things I talked about was I had gone to see, I know it was Anthrax. I don't remember who else was playing, but it's at a point where I really liked Anthrax, and I was sick. Like, we're driving there, I'm like, oh my God, I'm nauseous. I feel horrible. Like, this sucks. And I got there, I'm like, I'm not gonna be able to, I'm just gonna have to sit here. Because I would always go down front, get in the pit, so on and so forth. And I was just like, nope, that's not happening. They start playing about 30 seconds into the first song. I'm like, I'm feeling better.
Right.
I'm going down front, and I didn't feel sick again after that. It just like, boom, I was just fine.
Well, and I will say that not every time, trust me, because I've had some miserable gigs. But that also has a tendency to happen on gigs as well. If you're not, I mean, like, if you're sick as a dog, you're sick as a dog. But
Right.
If it's something that's a little bit more like kind of under the weather, a little bit of a cold, like you get into it and it all goes away.
This felt like the damn flu is what it felt like.
Whew.
And it just went away. And I'm thinking, okay, well, when the adrenaline wears off, it's going to come back. And it didn't. And I was like, okay, cool. Anthrax healed me.
Right. I mean, and it's funny, whatever the mood of music, it's hard to say what, Metallica could take you out of a bad mood, or Black Sabbath, or, whatever.
Well,
it's not always clear what it is that triggers me.
With me, a lot of times, if I'm depressed or feeling down, it's really depressing music that makes me feel better. It's almost like it syncs up with me. It would. I can say this though: it would never be Metallica.
Well, and interestingly, I've talked to some people who have written their most uplifting, sort of life affirming songs when they are in just the absolute, the absolute depths of depression and such too.
Yeah, that is absolutely a thing.
Depression is a powerful altered state of mind, for sure.
I will say the most shocking thing about your book, Mike, knowing that you're not into metal, was when I flipped the page and the title of the next chapter was King Diamond.
Yeah, I saw that. So that's that's a true story.
Well, I assume so. But you have the date wrong.
Do I really? Because I was trying to
Seriah,
piece it
don't
back.
tell someone who just released a book that they have a date wrong. That's the most disheartening thing you can tell someone.
I mean,
look,
it's okay because I don't think anything else changes. But
no, it doesn't change anything at all. I'm just like, King Diamond is one of my favorite musicians of all time. So I saw that and went, what? King Diamond?
What was the date that I had, and what is the correct date?
You said it was 1980, but in 1980, King Diamond was sort of in between Black Roses and Bratz. You saw him at L'Amour's, which means it probably would have been the first Merciful Fate tour, which would have been 1984. I know way too much about this stuff.
No, you might be. The only thing about that, and I don't want to. I believe you. I believe you. It doesn't comport with what where I was in terms of a number of things. That's the only thing I believe.
Well, I was wondering that.
It sort of doesn't. It feels like that would have been a little earlier.
Yeah, King was. I mean, their first show is 1983. So and that's in Copenhagen. It's actually on YouTube in pretty good quality.
Oh wow.
But yeah, if you saw King Diamond, it would have been with Merciful Fate, and the earliest it could have been at L'Amour's would have been 84.
So I'm sure you're right. But all the experience is there.
Yeah, the experience is. I mean, because you guys did mescaline before going in,
right? Yeah, good idea, right?
And you were not prepared for what that was going to be.
I had no idea. I mean, if I can say this, that it's funny where we were from as kids, and I can only speak for me, right? Where we were from the projects in Queens, in New York City in the 70s. It was rough and tumble. It was ugly. It was dangerous. It was littered.
You talk about an experience where someone literally put a gun to your head and asked for your radio.
Right, and I wisely didn't give it to him.
You're still here, so yes.
Right. I mean, that's a different deal, but it does connect to what you're saying. That what for me, I would say that there was a certain level of depression that I had that I was not aware of. I wouldn't have called it that. I didn't know what it was. And so what I wanted out of arts were like lifting me up. The grungy dirtiness of the city was very depressing.
Yeah.
And so I kind of connected at that age to things that were beatific and like took me into fantasy places. Like I say in that Seasons That Pass You By. By the way, I've been trying to get in touch with John Anderson because I want to send him. I want him to read it. I'd love him to read it.
Yeah.
I have through common. There's someone. So in the book, there's Yungchin Lamo, who played with Peter Rowan. She's a Tibetan singer. I've met her. I've become very good friends with her. She's absolutely lovely. I highly recommend her music. She played with John Anderson. She performed with him on some music, but it never got published. And so anyway, so I don't. All I mean to say is there's certain music that when I was younger, it didn't. I moved away from it, and I'll say even punk. We already had ripped clothes, and already had those things were. I wanted to be somewhere else. I wanted to be in some other kind of.
Yeah.
Well, it's a false fantasy, but that's where it was.
But that's what
Mentally.
music can do for you. That's one of the things, is it can take you out of the situation you're in.
Well, I was going to say too, and this is something that I mentioned in passing in one of the more introspective moments of my novel, is that music is also a time and a place. Like,
yes,
sometimes stuff will hit you when you've got to be in the right headspace for it to resonate, or something might resonate that's not that great, but there's a connection to a time and a place that allows it to take on new meaning. I think that's an experience that I've had relatively commonly.
Yeah. And I'm going to read a little bit from the book. I'll just say, so this is from that story. Psychedelic groups write songs about other worlds, about the love of the universe, of knowledge, that kind of crap. They transport us because I'm speaking about us, our friends, out of the drab Long Island City with its factories and project buildings, sending us into fantastic new realms. The album covers are fairy tale-like, a chunk of Earth floating out into space, extraterrestrial creatures. And the instruments they play, and play well, include mandolins, acoustic guitars, Moog synthesizers, spacey, far out, I won't say the word, somewhere between Lord of the Rings and Star Trek. This is where we want to be, lost in the cosmic swirl, not stuck in the dismal, I won't say the word, of the projects or the satanic hellhole of heavy metal. So that's kind of like how I'm framing it, is, we're like running away and trying to escape that burning building,
right.
in a sense. I think that over time, I even talk about rap in my early experience and kind of relationship with it, which has since changed very much, as it has with other, heavy metal and punk. But it took time.
Well, sure. And metal.
I can listen to a saw if it's in the right tune, in the right rhythm,
right,
and I can find it interesting.
And that would be industrial music.
Right.
But as a very wise person once told me, that's right. That's where I'm going with this. There's stuff that's good that you don't like, and stuff that's good that you do like, and there's stuff that's bad that you don't like, and stuff that's bad that you do like.
That's pretty much it. Yeah,
that's been the truest lesson, I think, that I have ever heard. I've used that so many times. People are probably sick of me saying it here, but
that's funny.
It's true.
Yeah, well,
that's funny. Please.
Because it occurred to me one day, like I think I was listening to Dream Theater and going, I don't like this. I mean, technically, it's great. I'm like, that's the thing though with music. It's like you can be a technically proficient musician, you can be a good songwriter, but it doesn't mean it's going to appeal to someone. Whereas you can be, playing 3 chords and just have the right energy. It's not technically good because there's 2 levels. There's that empirical level and that subjective level.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like they don't necessarily match up. People are like, oh, this is the best band ever. It's like, no, they're not actually that good. Metallica. So, but, that doesn't mean you can't love them, It doesn't mean it doesn't matter for what it does to you.
But it totally speaks to that, like, oh, there's something here that can't be quantified.
Yes. Yeah.
That, like, if, honestly, it's like a low-key refutation of materialism, but I think everything's a low-key refutation of materialism. But, like, it kind of is, though, right? I mean, because if something checks all the boxes of, being clever and technically proficient and all these different things, then it should be good, but sometimes it just ain't.
Right. Exactly. Sometimes you're like, why don't I like this more?
And then the inverse. Sometimes something is just absolute trash, but there's something so charming about it that you can't escape it.
Yep. And
absolutely. And it's context and, where you are, who you are at that time. Maybe someone who loved it, their enthusiasm is so intoxicating that you're like, wow, this is good. I like this,
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes, you see a band live, they have great energy, great charisma. You're like, oh my God, I love this. And then you get their album and you go, man, I really liked this band live.
Right. No, it's absolutely true.
There's so many components there, it's not, it's back in the early 90s when I was getting into trading demos and stuff, there'd be so many local bands I'd go to see, and I'd be like, man, these guys are great. And then you get their demo tape, and it was recorded on a 4-track and poor quality, and you'd be like, why can't they sound like they do when they're live,
Yeah. I don't know if you guys like Jerry Reed. He was a guitar player. He was a contemporary of Chet Atkins. Chet Atkins adored him. He's in all of the like Kentucky Fried something movie and Eastbound and Down. He wrote that song, Eastbound and Down. He's in those movies.
Kentucky Fried movie?
The Kentucky Fried movie.
Okay,
the movies that. With oh gosh, I'm forgetting his Burt Reynolds and these kind of car chaser movies and about the bootlegging kind of stuff. But Jerry Reed he's the guitar player that wrote Eastbound and Down, and he's in at least he's in that movie. He's a horrible actor, by the way. He's a totally horrible actor. But his guitar playing you see him play if you YouTube him, such a natural guitar player, and he was incorporating everything. He's a guy from the South, and he's playing kind of bluegrassy kind of stuff, but incorporating jazz. His chording knowledge and his sense of harmony, and I mean it's Mozart level. And Chet Atkins would look at him and just be like, I'm just a student of this amazing guy. But anything you buy recorded by him, it's crap. Yeah. It's overproduced. It's too much music. It's too dense. It's not the raw just genius of a guy picking up a guitar, playing anything brilliantly. It's you can never tell.
Oh, I do have one other comment I wanted to make about the King Diamond thing, is that I'm incredibly jealous that you got to see Merciful Fate at L'Amour's in 1984. I didn't even know who they were in 1984.
I have to say that experience, it was really funny. How there was a certain amount of terrifying, because of the mescaline and the long ride, and we're in this deeper part of this long ride that took us from Queens. You were never meant to go interboroughs. The train system wasn't designed for that. It was designed to take you from Queens to Manhattan, from Brooklyn to Manhattan, and so on. So this is like an odyssey, back then, and at that time, taking the trains with everything that could be going on, all of the precursor to getting there.
Was it like some of
which I can't repeat?
It like the Warriors?
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That's totally what I was thinking.
Except when I see the Warriors, they don't look like they don't look real. They look like they're putting it on.
Right.
I mean, the tough guys and maniacs that I knew were really crazy. I mean, and you hear those voices, and this is time, yeah, man, I'm going to come get you, guy. It just is I knew people that did scary things.
Right.
I love this section here. I'm going to read from that story. Goblins and demons follow us home, some of them disguised as ordinary subway passengers. We move to different cars to escape them, but because we can't stop laughing. Every time we do stop laughing, we get serious, concerned that some evil spirit will attack us with spikes and toss our severed limbs to other flesh-eating fiends. We aren't sure if the train is going down into hell or just west and north back to Queens. Somehow we make it home at almost 4 a.m, stumbling back to the Ravenswood Project building where we live. A pink silver streaks the sky, suggesting that the world will once again be wrested from the demons.
and
I'm really glad that you're reading passages from the book, because so much of the stuff in this space, and trust me, I have been guilty of it plenty. So much of the stuff in this place is very sort of utilitarian and functional, and it's nice to have something that has a bit of artistry to it.
Well, thank you.
What was I going to say? Yeah, King Diamond himself also has a lot of paranormal experiences, but he really hasn't talked too much about them. Early on, he talked about some of them, but he's way more private about that stuff now, unfortunately.
Why do you think he's private about it?
I I'm not totally sure. I mean, so Lyle Blackburn, the Bigfoot researcher, is actually his next door neighbor. King currently lives in Texas. And, I said something to him. I'm like, does he ever talk about this stuff? He goes, he has his spirituality and his whole belief system, but he doesn't really talk about it. It was kind of a shock value thing when he started doing it. Then he got more seriously into it. And then he kind of dropped a lot of the satanic elements and went more for horror movie type of stuff. So
yeah, interesting.
I think he still considers himself a Satanist. He was definitely practicing magic at one point, but I think it's just matured to a point where, he kind of just keeps it to himself.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure being so public about it, does it become kitsch? Did it become kitsch for him, and did it become,
He's always been a little kitsch,
Right.
You can only transgress so many times before, like, the entire act wears thin. It's like, well, what's my next frontier,
Right, yeah. Right. He's not going out there trying to be shocking anymore. He's going out there being the character he created, and he's trying to tell you scary stories.
Right. Yeah, that's cool. It's good. Theater is part of music.
Yeah.
It's part of the presentation.
And again, charisma can do so much for you in anything, but especially when you're on stage.
Well, I've been doing more work with a corporate band lately, and a phrase that has been said on numerous of these gigs, which are, my teacher back in college said, what was it he said? He said that the musically gratifying gigs don't pay, and the gigs that pay aren't musically gratifying. That's definitely proven true. But one of the phrases that's been said on these corporate band hits is most people listen with their eyes. And as much as I hate to hear that, there is some truth to that.
Yeah, and
got to be good looking because they're so hard to see.
When you get to that corporate level too, they don't know a damn about music. They're looking, what's that image going to appeal to?
Oh, don't get me started. I have stories.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I've heard stories. I've heard, there was a hyper talented band here, and the two main members, who were incredibly talented, were both, like when they had an AR person check them out, they told the band, well, get rid of these two members because they're not attractive enough. And it's like, that's the band, like...
Yep.
I mean, one thing as a musician, I'm older now, and you look at, you see a band and you say, they're so young, it's like music is so youthful. It's like, and of course, if you see the popular stuff and all of the popular stuff, they're almost dancers. I mean, they're dancers as maybe even more so than musicians.
Right.
Like,
right.
Who's that Dua Lipa? It's like a dance show.
Yeah.
But you also, what I see is that's what sells popular music is a look
and quick catchy hooks.
Youth.
Yeah. And quick catchy hooks, nothing too challenging.
I will say that when somebody is like a triple threat, where they have stage presence and they can dance and they can play or sing, it is sort of a transcendent thing. I'll never forget the first time I saw Trombone Shorty, and it was like, oh, is this what it was like to see James Brown live? Because he was just so energetic and dancing his tail off, and obviously the guy can play like nobody's business too.
So one of the chapters that really stood out to me was the Angelic Orchestra, and there's a couple of things in here in particular that he talks about. What was the guy's name?
Oh, that's James Iandoli, right?
Yeah.
Who he has a podcast. He has the Engaging the Phenomena podcast.
Oh, okay. Well, he tells a story in here about seeing a UFO, and then 2 months after he had that sighting of a fireball, he got into a car accident at that same spot.
Right.
And then
bizarre?
It is, but it's not the first time I've heard it. I mean, the one that comes immediately to mind was in the Goblin universe. There's a Loch Ness researcher, who saw what he thought was the Loch Ness monster a year later. And he saw it on land, and a year later, at that exact spot, he had a heart attack and almost died.
Right. Yeah, I thought that was an interesting, and I think so. I met James at there were the anomalous conferences. It's where Josh, you spoke at in New York City. That was one of the anomalous conferences, and James and Jay, Christopher King, I think Kelly Chase, that group they put those on. And I met James. We became friendly, And my question to him, and it's interesting because he had what I would say is a classic case. Like in a sense, he had something in my mind that I was looking for, that he had this extraordinary experience and there was music involved. And it reminded me of, I made reference to in the book, what's his name? Orfeo Angelucci. And Orfeo Angelucci, who wrote a terrific book, by the way, he was, I discovered him because Jung wrote about him. So Jung wrote about him, and Orfeo had the same kind of experience in that he saw this, he saw a craft. I wouldn't say it was identical because James's experience, the craft becomes kind of plasmatic. It becomes very like it's alive.
Right.
So it goes from being this orb to being this kind of plasma thing that's kind of undulating and moving and stuff. But in both cases, there was this kind of incredible music that came out of the experience. This beautiful, most beautiful music, indescribably kind of classical. It sounded to me classical, cathedral-like music. And that does happen. I mean, as much as people also have the experience of complete and utter silence.
Right.
So there's no one way. And one thing I think that you'll notice in the book is it had been asked of me. I think Whitley Strieber asked me and said, "Is there a way can you use music to make contact with non-human intelligence?" And I said, "I don't think you can make that happen. It's like any paranormal thing. You can't force it.
Right.
It's things have to happen." But it can happen in two ways, that through music, you can be transported into an experience.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes through an experience, you can have something musical can emerge from it. So it is kind of inside and outside. There's no one way.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say I had the experience of humming the end of a Fates Warning song and then having it whistle back to me on the wind. And I just sat there going, what? Am I actually hearing this? Like, I'm not really hearing this, am I? I'm like, I'm actually hearing this. Okay.
Was it in the same key? Was it the same notes?
It was the same notes. I'm not sure if it was the same key. Like I probably was off in mine. I mean, I'm not a musician, unlike you guys. I just have very high musical appreciation.
Yeah.
And there was also another case when we were talking about this guy, having an accident. There was I can't remember the name of the monster. It was one of those one-off weird monster encounters, and a year or so later, like to the date, the guy was shot on his porch right where he saw this thing.
Wow. Which
makes me wonder if it isn't some sort of energy projecting backwards, like from that trauma of being hurt, being in the accident, being, whatever, somehow manifesting that energy backwards, but you're not seeing it for what it is. So you're just seeing a UFO or a fireball or a monster in the case of dying from a gunshot,
Yeah, if we dwell in a state of every win, not everywhere, but every win, then that perfectly stands to reason that you would, and you've got to wonder, how many people have sort of a passing feeling of unease in the spot where they will eventually die, but they never disclose it and they never say it, and by the time they would have a chance to put it together, they pass away. They just
right.
Tell anybody about it. Yeah.
It's unconscious. Yeah. I walked by those stairs where I fell and broke my arm, and I look at those stairs derisively. I'm like, I look at them on these stairs. I want to get a sledgehammer out and just break them to bits.
Do you stomp extra hard when you go up them?
Right. Exactly. I do. I stare down at them, and also I realize, I say, my gosh, they're so small. What happened? I would like to read that part that James. So I'm going to read from James and say, ahead. Because I was exhausted while driving, I fell asleep at the wheel, crashing my car. When I awoke, I was face to face with a being of light. The being's, quote, body was tapered down. It had arms, a neck, a head, and a chest, but I didn't see any feet. It was a whitish blue. The experience was different from everyday reality. I was conscious and aware the entire time. I knew it wasn't a dream. It was more like I suddenly woke up out of a dream and was now face to face with this entity. Then I heard an amazing crystalline-like angelic orchestra. Suddenly, I was above the scene of the accident, looking down at the whole thing. I saw an ambulance in my car. I thought that I was dead. I didn't feel like I was in my body. However, I was totally relaxed. I didn't feel any regret or panic. In fact, I felt complete equanimity, like I was in a meditative state. A few moments later, I was back in my body. Then it occurred to me that I was looking down at the accident from the vantage point of where I had seen the fireball. I started to think, what if the fireball was a being from another dimension, or my conscious awareness from the future? Perhaps we present ourselves to other beings, or even to our future selves, as a fireball in another realm. That experience generated 1,000 questions. So, I mean, much what you guys were just saying, the when of things, and what is the connection, what are the connecting corridors to that? What is the surface of this reality, and how does it appear in some other realm?
Right.
I think of the story of Flatland. If you guys know Edwin Abbott, and my foot on a two-dimensional world, as I step my foot down, my sneaker, all they can see in a two-dimensional world is the vector where my sneaker
Suddenly
crosses
appears
2 dimensions.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't look like a shoe. It looks like a splurge of not a splurge, a spludge of stuff that
came out
in
of
2
nowhere.
dimensions. Right, exactly. It just appeared, and also it went to nowhere.
Like most UFOs.
Yeah. Right.
We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Quick break here to give you some contact info and recommendation. Contact info, wheredidtheroadgo.com. Everything's there. All links to the social media, to every show we've ever done. Everything you could possibly want can be found there at wheredidtheroadgo.com. You can also become a patron, and that will get you extra content with every show, almost every show anyway. And the show's a week or two early, commercial-free, plus extra stuff on top of that. If you have a story you'd like to send in for a listener stories show, stories at wheredidtheroadgo.com is the place to do that. If you like heavy music, check out my other show, my music show, The Last Exit for the Lost. And that can be found at thelastexit.org. There's a Mixcloud archive of shows and a bunch of shows archived on the page going all the way back to like 1996. Sparsely. They're not complete, but there's some pretty old stuff up there from my early days in radio. All right, as for a recommendation, I'm going to go back a little bit just in case anyone happened to miss this. I just this week listened to the audiobook of Annihilation, and there was a movie made out of this book called Annihilation. And if you have not seen the movie, you definitely have to see the movie. The movie is amazing. The book is nothing like the movie. The book is okay. I was surprised how different it was from the movie, and how much better the movie actually was than the book. The book is very, I don't know how to put it. It's just not, there's not a lot of action to it. It's very dry, I guess. And like I said, it's not bad. But the movie is amazing. And after I listened to the audiobook of Annihilation, I went and watched the movie again. And man, if you haven't seen that movie is just fantastic. And apparently the guy who did it read the book and then made the movie a few years later. And instead of going back and rereading the book, he just kind of took what he got from the book, what he remembered from the book, and built on that. And I'm glad he did it that way because it worked out really nice. At this point, I'm halfway through the second book, and I kind of feel the same way. I like them. I'm enjoying them. But not a lot really happens in the books, and it's kind of weird. I mean, it's a weird story to begin with, but it seems like there'd be a little more to it, a little more meat to it than what's actually there. All right, back to the show. All right, so continuing this with Mike and Joshua here. In that same story we were talking about, he talks later about going outside, seeing a UFO and having a Kundalini experience. And the low hum, voom, voom, voom that he experiences from the UFO is actually something I've felt from the Kundalini. So like that immediately resonated with me. I was like, oh yeah, I know that. But I never had one with a UFO. And that was interesting.
That's because you are the UFO.
Yeah, I might be. Okay. So here's just a quick story of things in my life. The other day, I went to see Peter Robbins because he was having problems with his printer, and he lives like 20 minutes away from me. And as I'm working with his printer, I'm leaning over the lamp on his desk, and the lamp starts flickering. And I'm like, did I hit this? What's going on? So I'm playing with it, and it stops. I'm like, okay, maybe that's just loose. And so I'm doing it again, and it starts flickering. I'm like, did I hit that again? I could have hit it. And then I lean a little bit to the right, closer to his monitor, and his monitor turns off. And I'm like, okay, nope, this is just me. Because every time I sit down at my computer without touching anything, I sit in the chair, the main monitor just turns off for like 2 seconds and then comes back on.
Right.
Because this is what I do to electronics.
Yeah.
And so, when that happened with Peter's monitor, I'm like, okay, I may or may not, the light may or may not have a loose switch, but I didn't even touch the monitor. And it came back on after 2 seconds.
That's a classic Seriah story.
And Peter's just like, yeah, okay. And I'm like, yeah, all right.
So, some people just they mess up electronics.
No, that's me.
Yeah. I mean, you hear about this, that they kind of they cause things to stop working.
Yep. Sometimes called interference syndrome, which was a term I haven't heard till recently, but it definitely works. But the interesting thing with Kundalini, too, is that you have, first of all, a lot of people with awakened Kundalini do have interference syndrome, but also there's music tied to that. Like, some of my first Kundalini experiences before I even knew what was happening to me were sounds of like chimes, bells ringing, things like that, which are very common, the buzzing, which you get from UFOs. And I was playing trombone at the time in elementary school, and would see smoke coming out of the end of the trombone as I was playing it. Unless someone else was in the room, then it didn't do it. And I knew I was hallucinating. I'm like, that can't be real. There's no mechanism for that to be real, but I'm looking at it.
Right. I like the term, the term psychedelic, which Aldous Huxley and Humphrey Osmond coined. And they didn't want to use the term hallucinate. They wanted to use the term psychedelic. They very intentionally came to it, that it meant mind manifesting. And so not that you're seeing something that isn't there, it's manifesting. You are co-creating it. I've had experiences where, especially during the COVID period, but I've had it other times too, when I had COVID and then I had a tooth infection at the same time. And the doctors, so I had an impacted tooth taken out, and the doctors couldn't explain it. I had incredible headaches. I mean, migraines I was crying. It was tears running down my face from pain. I wasn't like, going, wah. I was just, tears were running down. It was so painful. I would see on TV like ice cream, and then I would smell it. There were things like, I can't remember all of it, but I was seeing things and smelling them, or there was this kind of synesthesia going on. And it was very strong at that time. And then I would sit there, we're on the couch, we're watching TV, my younger son and my wife, and I'd say, do you guys smell smoke? I'm looking around. And do you guys smell smoke? No, we don't smell smoke. Okay, well, I smell cigar smoke. And then there would be like someone smoking a cigar in the show. Very strange. Very strange.
That's really wild, because it completely eliminates the possibility that it was, you doing
suggested.
Suggestive. Yeah.
It's precognitive.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, time doesn't work like we think it does.
Right, and also trauma. So
yeah,
like James had here, and as Jeff Kripal will often say, and I'll say it in Jeff's voice. This has a lot to do with trauma. This has a lot to do with trauma. I say it jokingly because Jeff is so. What I love about Jeff is he doesn't want to latch on to the next sensationalist thing. He often wants to downplay everything.
Right.
And that's his style, and that's why he's so effective, and that's why we all adore him. At least I do. I think you guys probably do
yes,
too.
Absolutely.
I said something. I keep going off on a tangent, but I wrote something. I wrote a review of Jeff's book, How to Think Impossibly, and I wrote the review. And then Jeff wrote back to me. One of the things I said in the review, he said, I laughed at this part. I said, there's something about the way Jeff writes. It's so matter of fact. It's so sober. It's like a Nebraska farmer telling you something without any sensationalism. And Jeff wrote to me, and he goes, when I read that, I laughed out loud. But there's something in that going back to the trauma thing, that James had this traumatic thing happen, and we often see that there's trauma, and in a way, like music, takes us out of our ego. Takes us, and I think, Josh, your book is probably writing about some of this stuff, that taking us out of our everyday ego, and it makes available. There's more of a perceptual feel. There's more things we can potentially see, hear, feel, know, experience, but we're locked into this kind of filtered, this other filtered everyday reality, which, as is it Daniel Hoffman would say, is our consciousness has not evolved to make us know the truth and know everything. Consciousness evolved to help us kind of progress through our, the needs, the things we have to need to exist. The obtaining food, obtaining sex, obtaining safety. Consciousness did not evolve to show us the truest, the doors of perception. Those have to be kind of knocked open by some types of experience. I mean, some people, it comes to them. Right. They just have an extraordinary experience. But some people, it happens because of something that may have occurred, where they get clanged on the head by something that opens up the potential to experience things. And that could be, like James had, this extraordinary Kundalini experience. And James, by the way, he's a great guy, and he's a very spiritual person. And all of this has led to him becoming, very spiritual, having a very, he's a very devoted practice. I'm inspired by, speaking to him and learning from him, really, like I am with you guys.
I very much enjoyed that chapter with him. The other thing I wanted to make sure we got to is this whole sound bath thing.
Yeah.
And one of the quotes here that, what's his name, Lou Maurer?
Yes, Lou Maurer, yep.
One of the quotes he says is that no one hears these sounds the same way, but I think that's probably true. I mean, it's probably true of perception in general. We don't perceive reality the same way. But I often wonder if that's part of the reason our taste in music is not all the same, because we hear different things, Right. We're not hearing the same thing the person next to you is hearing. Even if they like the same music you're listening to, it's different to each of us.
And frankly, we don't even... we hear it differently at different times.
Yeah.
I think listening is a thing we have to train ourselves to. And as musicians, we're all musicians, and being a musician, it comes with the territory. You have to become a good listener, a better listener. And I mean, I listen to music with intensity, where I kind of stop doing things and I really zero in, and I may listen 100 times. And my wife will say, "You've played this 100 times already. Are we going to move on to a different thing?" No. And I'm like, I'm just beginning to penetrate it. Could you hear it? Do you hear the bells? Do you hear the chimes? Did you hear the harp? And she'll really look at me and just say, "Okay, I mean, she's very patient, I should say. I'm only making kind of a bit of a joke, but I'm not really. If I can say one thing, I took her to see Fred Frith. If you guys know, it's kind of industrial music. He's like John Cage. And he played on a stage he had like a platform that he had fretboards that were amplified, magnetic things that were amplified. He had actual magnets that he kind of moved around on this mic'd platform. So everything was very sensitive. He had percussion instruments. He had objects that you didn't know what they were, and some loops he used. And there was a celloist, and there was another player doing something like what Fred Frith was doing. And it was incredible composition. I mean, it was ultimate playing with sound, with little clicks and little, things that are not traditional instruments.
Right.
And I was sitting there and I was completely engaged, and I could hear this. It was like a chamber music. And about 15 minutes in, my wife just looks at me. She says, "You owe me. You owe me." And I was like, do you want to go? Or would you, she sort of, just leaned back and, huffed a bit. And then she began to enjoy it more, but I was completely into it.
I had an ex-girlfriend who did not like heavier music. Like, she liked metal, but she didn't like real heavy stuff. And one night I had a band called Limbonic Art in, and they're a black metal band that's very, very intricate and very fast. And to her, it just sounded like noise. And she started to fall asleep. And right as she was relaxed and about to fall asleep, she suddenly goes, "Oh my God, I hear it." And I'm like, what? She goes, I can hear what's going on. It doesn't sound like noise anymore.
That's funny. That is really funny.
That's really
That's a great. That's super interesting. Like her mind, it finally it entered into her understanding.
Yeah.
That's a revelation right there.
Because I think she wasn't listening for something. It was just there.
Yeah. For anyone who's not musically inclined, a simple exercise would be to like take a song that you're familiar with and ask yourself, have you ever really listened to what the drummer's doing? Like really listen to what the drummer's doing? And even that alone can, it's oftentimes one of the easier things to hear in the texture because there's nothing else like it.
Right.
And so just like take the time to just sort of really zero in on that, and it can be really interesting and can help you understand why certain songs work.
Yeah. And there's a we have to come to the art too. We can't be lazy if we go to the art. There's something in it for us.
Yeah. Well, so talk about the sound bath a little bit, your experience with this.
Yeah. So I have to say, Marla, do you guys know Marla Freese?
No.
So she wrote a book called American Psychic. I think she did the Dreamland podcast for a period. She knows Whitley.
It sounds familiar. Yeah.
She's lovely, and I've gotten to know her. And we had a conversation. So I was really thinking music. And then she and I spoke. Her book, American Psychic, is very interesting. And she talks about how she worked with police departments and stuff to help solve, crimes and stuff. But she, when I talked to her and she told me about Lou Maurer, and I said, so the scope of this book is not just about music, it's about sound. And so it was very interesting that he does these it's gong yoga actually, and they select these gongs. The gongs, this tradition of making gongs goes back, way back. Chinese masters that made these gongs, they make the gongs according to astrological signs. So the gongs are very intentionally selected. They're made to hit to a certain frequency. So when you hit them, and you also have different ways that you hit them. So there's some of the tools that use have a shimmer, some have a ding, so they have different purposes. What Lou said is, he said he has no training in music, and he said the gongs teach him how to play. But what happens is that, and we did some sessions over the phone, and I should say that I subsequently then went to explore like sound baths. I went to explore a sound bath in New York City, where I wanted to go into a live place to have the experience too. But what's interesting is that when you're hearing these, say with a sound bath, they may use a gong, they'll use chimes, they'll use bowls. And it's kind of like a meditation center. You go in, you lie down. And I remember first time I went to the sound bath, I ran to the place because it's New York City, and it's traffic and busy, and you kind of work yourself up. And I get to the place and I'm thinking, my heart's beating. How am I going to relax for this? And the guy leading the meditation, he sort of, close your eyes, take in deep breaths. I want you to think, this kind of, in a way, cliched, but I don't mean it that way. But once the sound bath, the bowls, you started to hear them ringing, you were just washed over. The sound, the frequencies just really took you over.
Yeah.
You were not going to not have an experience. This was like a river that was beginning to the dam broke over and was flooding you. And you go into like a hypnagogic state where it's kind of like a trance state. I mean, I'm sure you guys know. And you start to have things pop up, like basically voices and say personalities. So it's like in a hypnagogic state where it's before you begin to dream.
Right.
You get these very inchoate kind of, they're almost like ideas, but they could be voices, beings, some kind of interactions, but you can't make sense of them. They don't have narrative form yet.
Right.
And it's like elephants dripping from telephone pole with machine looking gun staring down at vegetable.
A bit like free association kind of.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it hasn't yet entered the narrative stage, but I began to, go into the state where what's funny is I was having these beings getting experiences that they're arguing with me, and I'm, I thought later to myself, like, is that me? Am I arguing with myself? But then, as I did more research and I explored other sort of sound experiences, sonic experiences. So say the hemisync, using hemisync,
Right.
when Robert Monroe would talk about who invented hemisync, or with other people, I should say, the Monroe Institute, that he talked about having experiences with non-human intelligence that would actually had a sense of humor and would be an advisor. And it's funny because when he would go into the state, it's like he returned back to the being that was waiting there for him. And it was an ongoing conversation over many years. And they also gave, advice to like the broader humanity on taking care of the planet and so on. I thought that was very interesting, that there are many ways to make contact. And at the end of the day, I think what I'm trying to say is music is a contact modality. And with what, we don't know exactly. I don't know, at least. And it's not one way. It's not one experience. It's polyphonic. There are many voices. There are many paths to getting to that ocean of collective unconscious, which is where I think that's like the Akashic records. It's where that's where there's communication there. There's some. It's even in the form of bits. It's in the form of. It can be reduced to a mathematical thing, that there's something being shared and expressed, but it's not just that. It's also music, it's also sound, and it also gives you emotions. It takes you back to in your memory log. It's transformative. It can make you joyous. It can make you sad. I think what I'm trying to say is it's this pyramid. If you look at it like I'm making a pyramid with my hands right here, and it's not just one thing. It's this hyper object of something that is beyond our comprehension to really understand. But it could be something that's just the exchange of bits. Maybe in bum 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 bum. Maybe there's just something being said there that is understood by another intelligence in some other way.
Well, there's also the fact that neurologically our brains seem to be hardwired for music, which is interesting to me as well. Because why would that be? Unless it's important.
I mean, just think when you hear it, and you could have these incredible welling up of emotion. I mean, I've been vacuuming while listening to music, and suddenly you're start crying. Mm-hmm. Because you remember something of the past and someone you've lost,
right?
For example, right. But more than that, there is something. There is something in that exchange of just information, that it's a language. As I say in the book, it's a language that it's a universal language. I don't have to know your language, your spoken language, to understand your music.
Right.
We can sit together. We could play music, not speaking, not understanding, and. Beyond, animals and plants respond to sound as well. And there is science that's corroborates this. It's not just, if you want to use the word woo, is that the word they use, the term? So it's a real thing.
Yes.
But I think it's something that I've only really just begun in this book. All I do is scratch the surface.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's a lot more there. Years ago, when Project Archivist was still a podcast, Rojan had read a scientific article on the air about how you don't appreciate new music after you turn like 28 or 29, something like that. And I was like, what?
No.
I mean, maybe some people don't, but I certainly do. And everyone I know who's over 30 does. I mean, I'm regularly just blown away by music where I'll hear something for the first time and be like, whoa.
Yeah.
Wow. But I guess if you're the type of person who only listens to music casually and it's not a priority in your life, yeah, maybe you just kind of stick to the stuff that, you grew up on. Like I've seen people that I went to high school with, and they're still listening to the same stuff they listened to at high school. Not that I don't also include that in the music I listen to, but I'm also constantly looking for new things that are going to really floor me.
Right. I think there are those of us that seek that cognitive, that like reconfiguration, because there's something aesthetically pleasing and reading something challenging, interesting, different.
Yeah.
That makes you kind of, you go, wow, okay. I mean, that's what fascinates me about the UFO topic is it's a complete, you have to reevaluate everything. You have to reevaluate metaphysics and what is consciousness.
Yes.
You have to rethink everything. And I guess it's, most people, and I'm not putting them down, life is hard. And I understand you just want to go about doing your thing. And, God bless you. It's not like I don't have problems, but I need that aesthetic kind of, that injection. I need that kind of, that rush of reconfiguration, of looking at things anew, whether it's through music. And it's incredible how much stuff there is out there. You can just, how many books and how many new systems of thought and music, and it's infinite.
Yeah. Just when you think like, well, how's anyone going to top that? They do.
Right. Exactly. And a new book, and you just say, or a new music, and you say, how did I never hear that?
That's been one of the most rewarding things about. I don't have a lot of love for the algorithm, but I will say that if you can start watching the kind of things, if you're into music and you start watching like really strange niche things, the level of the way that things like YouTube and the internet have democratized the ability to hear some of those talents that are out there.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is absolutely jaw-dropping, the sort of things that people are doing. And, I will say this, as long as we're on the subject of people listening to what they like and sort of shutting themselves off to new experiences as they grow older. There's always, for every one person that's famous, there are like 40 people that you will never hear of unless you stumble upon them on the internet or something like you might nowadays.
True.
Yeah.
Who can just play circles around them or sing circles around them. And I suppose that's true with anything. But yeah, it now is, I can't think, there has not been a time in human history, officially recognized human history, when there has been this sort of access to just being exposed to the talent that's out there. So it really can be quite encouraging in that regard.
Yeah, and there's a lyric from Skyclad that says something like, "Why is it the ones you always hear the most say nothing that's worthwhile?" And I think that's generally pretty much the case. There are some very talented, popular bands. It does happen. You mentioned Yes. Iron Maiden are exceptionally talented band and such, but like there's so much stuff out there that's just garbage, compared to what exists. Like it's rare that a super talented band becomes really popular.
Well, it's the difference between Paranormal TV and some of these minds that are out there that don't get any attention. Yeah,
exactly. So we're almost out of time. I do want to. There was a thing you wrote here that I really liked that said, "The origin of music seems man, words are so hard sometimes. Inextricably bound up with the origin of consciousness, although we don't yet know how, and we may never will. Perhaps buried in the leap from pre-human primate to thinking hominid is a song. That song is as old as the universe itself. Comprehending this hidden knowledge is the key to understanding our place in the cosmos."
Wow, I said that?
Well, it's in your book.
No, I know. No, I'm kind of joking, but I do feel that way. I do feel that that's part of what makes it so significant to us too. That there's because Josh and I talked about this. I think we believe, scientists believe that the ability to sing preceded the ability to speak.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. It's more like the universe is more like a song than it is a machine. And there's music abound. I mean, rocks have frequencies. Inanimate objects, things we don't ascribe, kind of vitality to. There's something humming, and there's something kind of. I do think that there's something in the matrix deep down in there, that there's something being said. In the bird song, and I probably say this all the time, but I leave my apartment. I live near a big park in Brooklyn, and yes, there are trees in Brooklyn, and we have a profusion of bird types, and I hear this symphony of birds, but it's in spring. They kind of slowly trickle in, and in spring, and then throughout summer, and I just think they are saying something very intelligent, and we are not awake enough to notice it. We're not paying attention,
right?
And until we hear what that is, and there's other musics, and there's other kind of intelligence, non-human intelligence that is abound, and we basically ignore it because we're in a state of sleep for the most part.
That's a good way to put it. So is the book out now?
Yeah, the book came out in February 1st, which was St. Bridget's Day. And and it's available anywhere you can buy books. If you go to my website, MikeFiorito.com, if you have a question or something, I do have links to all of the books there as well. But anywhere you can buy books, UFO Symphonic can be found. And I don't know about your favorite bookstore, but it can be ordered through Ingram, is like the distributor that gets books to all the bookstores.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming on and talking to us. And Joshua, thank you for making me aware of him.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm in the book too.
Yeah. Josh wrote the. He was generous enough and kind enough to write the foreword, and
which is actually 700 pages. But
right. Yeah, you're not wrong.
I said, first of all, it's a great forward.
I don't
want to.
It is.
I know you want to. I say to people, it just reads Josh's forward, and you can close the book. It's okay.
Sure.
But it's a great forward, and honored that you read it. I'm sorry that you wrote it. And Seriah, thank you both for having me on to talk about it, because
absolutely.
It's been such a pleasure, and I'm interested to keep the conversation going.
All right. Well, you're welcome back. So.
Well, thank you. Let's do it again.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons. I can't do this without you, so thank you for supporting the show, and know that every positive thing that comes out of this show is partially because of you. I want to give a special shout out to all my patrons who are pledging $10 or more a month: Greg Ross, John Blackburn, Madeline J., Marty Garza, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Tim, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Marthartha, Midnight Review Presents, Christine, a blue second-gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Abby Allen, Cherry Trapezoid, Patricia Giaquinta, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Billuminati, Bright Rectangle, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Corey Nelson, Diane B., MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, Jamie Page, History and Coffee, J. Otto Bullitt, Jack Huntington, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Mattingly, John Bracken, Jonathan Frost, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Shurek, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linda from Michigan, Linz Jackson K., MJ Armstrong, Mark Shoemaker, Mark Brady, Mark Smith, Paul Jeffries, Perry Peters, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Sasha McHale, Janet's Planet, Strange Stories with the Seeker and Skeptic Podcast, Verosh K., Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, Stacy Sherwood, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Victoria, Vincent Trewill, Will Cherry, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, Colin Karras, Craig Sagastumi, and Matthew Brown. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. I hope you enjoyed that. There's a shorter than normal Patreon to go along with this show, but it's still decently lengthy. As a lot of Patreon segments run almost the length of a whole nother show. And if you want to become a patron, it's only $3 a month. And you can do so at wheretheroadgo.com. Just click on the big Patreon link, and that'll get you there. I want to welcome a few new patrons this month. Christopher Galliano, Peter Brogna, and Nottingham 100, or 100 with a exclamation point. Welcome, and I hope you enjoy the extra content. I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.